Ever wondered how to turn your love of whiskey into a curated collection of bottles worthy of sharing with your friends? Stick around, I may be able to help with that.
Simple whiskey, Cyncere. Here to keep it 100. What's the ABV? Keep it simple. Simple whiskey. And be sweeter.
Welcome to the Simple Whiskey Show. I'm Cyncere, and tonight we're diving into a few of my suggestions on what bottles you should start with when starting a collection in 2024. No matter how knowledgeable you are on something, you have to start somewhere. And while I'm no expert, I do have a bit of insight and information I can share with you to hopefully help you along on your journey. But before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notification bells to stay up to date on all things Simple Whiskey. Let's dive right in. Starting any type of collection can be intimidating. Deciding what to collect, why you're collecting it, and how you plan to acquire it can all be a bit much. If you landed on whiskey as your what to collect, then my first piece of advice I can give you is take time to understand your palate. I wish I had done this earlier on, but anybody who knows me knows that when I make my mind up to do something, I go 110% in, even if there's no real plan to get there first. I'm so excited to get started and going after something, I just attack it head on. Unfortunately for me, this means I purchased a lot of whiskeys that were similar in flavor profiles that didn't really help me open up my palate, nor give me a better understanding of what I really liked. It was just like, oh, bourbon. That's not the approach that I would recommend, solely because now, as I look through the things that I really enjoy, there are a wide variety. You got your traditional 3 grains, 4 grains, wheaters, Irish whiskeys that have really hit the spot, some finished whiskeys. So there's just a wide variety of things that I've been able to enjoy over the amount of time of collecting. But I would have got there a lot quicker had I opened up my palate earlier on, as opposed to just buying name bottles that I saw on YouTube that people were like, oh yeah, this is a good one. This is a good one. This is a good one. Well, they were a lot of them were similar. What I wish I'd have done would have been to just buy a few different types, maybe 5. And so with that, I'll take you into 5 that I recommend you start out on. This by no means is an all-inclusive list of, you start with these 5, you'll understand your palate completely. These are just kind of helping you cut your teeth on the overall concept of drinking whiskey neat, uncovering some of those flavor profiles and getting a better understanding as to what really sits well with you and what doesn't sometimes. That will be able to push you in a direction as to, okay, now next steps, what should I try next? What type of bottles should I be on the hunt for when I'm out there in the wild? So without further ado, let's get started. So this list isn't in a buy this first, buy this second order, but it is in a take these 5, cut your teeth on them, and then figure out the next 5. The first one I'm going to mention is Maker's Mark Original. It's a 90 proof, around $35. I call it the red wax wheater. It has a lower proof, sweeter profile on it. They sub out rye for a soft red winter wheat in the blend, which gives it some of those sweeter notes on the palate, as well as the sweeter nose you get whenever you're nosing some Maker's Mark. A lot of folks that I talk to aren't fans of Maker's Mark. It's not for everybody, but what I will say is that at 90 proof and with the sweeter profile, if you're not used to sipping whiskey neat, this is a great one to start out with, solely to get a better understanding as to what it can taste like without getting a lot of that ethanol-y burn. They consistently put out the same exact mash bill blend and things of that nature, to where you know what to expect when you get them. Whether you're new to whiskey or you've been in it for a little bit, this is a good one for you to just say, okay, this is different. This isn't your run-of-the-mill traditional bourbon notes, in my opinion. This is also one that I passed on a lot early on, primarily because I was listening to my friends who didn't like Makers and telling me, oh yeah, Makers isn't that great, it's overpriced for what you get. I had a Maker's Mark, I feel like it was an old fashioned, and it was okay. But then I also requested, let me get a little bit of that neat just to get the flavor profile on it. Sure enough, here I am, 17 bottles into my collection, just trying Maker's Mark neat for the first time. And I'm like, you know what? This is actually different. I would have never known that Maker's was the move had I not ventured out from what everybody kept telling me. So while I'm offering you up this advice from my perspective, this doesn't mean that these 5 are the only 5 you should start with. This also doesn't mean go buy these 5 and just get going. What it means is take exactly what I'm saying in this and apply it in your own way, but be more strategic about the first 5 bottles you purchase, as opposed to just saying, oh, this person said this is good, this person said that is good. If you can get a taste of it at a restaurant, which all 5 of these are readily available, at least in stores. As for restaurants, not every restaurant's going to carry these 5, but if you can get them at a bar or restaurant, it's a lot easier to get a taste for them there, as opposed to spending the money on the entire bottle. I tend to do the opposite. Usually, if I know that it's going to cost me $30 a pour for a $90 bottle, I may as well just get the $90 bottle. That's not mathematically smart, but at the end of the day, I like sharing my experiences with other people. If I'm at a restaurant by myself, I'm not going to sit there and order 6 different bourbons to try by myself. I'd rather enjoy the experience with somebody that I actually like conversing with. Second on my list today is Elijah Craig Small Batch. This one's 94 proof, $30, around $30 at most stores. It's typically readily available. This was a go-to bourbon for me when I first started out, whether it be mixing it in a cocktail, sipping it neat, even a Friday night sipper when I first started out. This is one of those that when I think quintessential bourbon profile, it's like a warmer, oaky, baking spices, a little bit of something sweet, but nowhere near as sweet as like a Widow Jane Decadence per se. But it's definitely a sweeter, smoother bourbon profile. And again, at 94 proof, it's not overly high. More often than not now, I don't usually have as much of it on hand. I've moved to the Elijah Craig barrel proofs and toasted barrel. But I do find myself, when I get wore out from one of the next ones I'm about to mention, I usually rotate between 3 of them. And this is one of the 3 that I traditionally tend to rotate through. But I'll speak more on that one here in a moment. Wild Turkey 101. Proof is in the name, usually around $28. This was one that when I was in college, they used this in some of the party shots and things like that. It wasn't one that I would say, oh my gosh, that's a classic bourbon that you want to sip neat and take it slow. That was a shooter. So it was weird to go back to this one now, X amount of years post-college, and say, oh my gosh, this actually has decent flavor profile. How come I wasn't on this one when I first started? A couple of the folks that I watch on YouTube really enjoy Wild Turkey 101. So as I kept seeing it in more and more videos, I figured, why not? It's $28 a bottle. I bought my first bottle of this, and I can't even tell you how many bottles I've went through since first exploring this as an option. From a flavor perspective, you get vanilla, you get caramel, you get a little bit of that oakiness. 101 proof, excellent when you mix it in a cocktail. Also just as good to sip neat. It's one of those that if you are looking for something to take you one notch higher than your Buffalo Trace or your Evan Williams White Label even. Evan Williams White Label is 100 proof, but it does not have the flavor that Wild Turkey 101 has, even though I really do like Evan Williams White Label. So, just my thoughts, do with them as you see fit. The other one I was going to mention earlier that I said I go between the 3 of them, it's Elijah Craig Small Batch, Wild Turkey 101, and then Old Granddad 114 are typically my 3. At any given moment, I'm going to have one of those on hand. What you see behind me is not where I usually keep my Old Granddad now or my Elijah Craig Small Batch. I have a table off this way that I have all my mixers, what I consider Goto Sippers. What I consider Goto Sippers is the same category that if you watch some of these other videos, they talk about a daily sipper. My Goto Sippers are on that table. And right now I have Knob Creek 9, Old Granddad 114, Old Forester 100, Sazerac Rye, Sagamore Rye, and Four Roses Small Batch Select, in addition to the one that I have in my glass that I'm going to touch on next. So that just gives you an idea of any one of those I just named would be great for you to start out with, though a few of them are quite similar, so I wouldn't recommend hey, take that list I just named and go buy 5 of those. The list that I'm recommending right now gives you a little bit more of that variety. So if you're new to it and just looking for ideas of where to start, stick with the original list. Up next, Old Forester 1920. 115 proof, 55, 60 bucks. This is the one that I'm actually sipping tonight. Such a good nose. This one I always tend to get a deeper cherry note, a little bit of banana nut bread, caramel. But it's also a step up from the first 3 that I mentioned. And as you start to evolve, this is one that I feel like could be just as easily a Friday night pour. But I don't consider it a Friday night pour because I can find it on a regular basis. I do believe that just about everywhere that you go state-wise, you should be able to find 1920 pretty regularly. It's a part of the Whiskey Row series. I really enjoy the 1910 as well. But instead of throwing the 1910 on the list, I have another one up next that I'll highly recommend. That when I first found it, it just blew my socks off. It was one that the very first sip of that one, I think I went through an entire bottle of that one quicker than any other bottle that I'd had. It was one that just keeps pulling you back in for a sip after sip after sip, weekend after weekend after weekend, and friend after friend after friend. But to this one, the 1920, this was the first one of the Whiskey Row series I tried. I did just mention that I have the Old Forester 100 over there as one of my regular mixers, but very rarely do you see anything that holds water to this one. 115 proof, 55, 60 bucks a bottle. This is definitely a good one. I always have this one on hand. I always have the 19. I say always. Typically, I have this on hand. Typically, I have the 1910 on hand. The last bottle of 1910 I actually took to a 50th birthday party. We drank it by the campfire and went through the entire bottle that night. And it was a group of us. But that was such a great experience that, of course, I'll continue to buy both the 1920 and the 1910. Heck, I may even do a video on what they call the 1915, where you mix the 1910 and the 1920. It's supposed to give you some sort of a great flavor, some sort of a great mix. I'm not even sure if they sell it that way. Somebody let me know down in the comments. 1, if you want to see a video where I mix the 2 and make 1915, and then 2, if they actually sell the 1915 separately. Obviously, I can look it up myself and I might after this. But let me know down below in the comments. You guys usually keep me honest. So last and certainly not least, Woodford Reserve Double Oak. It's probably the most expensive out of the 5, but it's worth it. For me, that chocolatey, toasted marshmallow, I don't want to say campfire in terms of campfire smoky oaky, but it is a double oaked. So to me, more often than not, when I have a sip of something that's double oaked and some things that are toasted, I end up getting some hint of a chocolatey note. And when it comes to the Woodford Reserve Double Oak, that chocolatey note is full-fledged, upfront, in your face. But it's not a negative, like overly sweet note. It's just something about that finish and something about that overall mid palate, as well as the mouthfeel, that just gives you welcome home, light a fire, get you a s'more, because this is what you got in the glass. One of the other notes that I typically get on it is pancakes with syrup. You get that fluffy, buttery, buttered pancake with a little bit of maple syrup. And it can be hit or miss. Some nights I'll take the same exact bottle, have a sip of it, and I'll get more of a chocolatey, oaky, smoky. Other nights I'll open it up, and it may be the second sip of the night, and I'll end up with that pancakes and syrup. Either way, you can't go wrong. I've yet to meet any of my friends that did not like the Woodford Reserve Double Oak. Another one to let me know down in the comments if you had it. Did you like it? Do you typically see yourself going back to it? Or was it one that just something about the flavor profile didn't work for you? And if that's the case, let me know what it was about that flavor profile that just didn't sit well with it. Either way, I absolutely love it. There's no right or wrong when it comes to what to start your whiskey collection with. what to put in it, what not to put in it. You notice I didn't mention any ryes. Knob Creek has a good rye. There's a lot of different ryes you can start with. I personally would recommend you start with 5 that are not ryes, figure out that side of things, then slowly move into ryes. Because ryes, you get that minty note. Some of them you get more of a cinnamon or a baked rye bread spice note that can be a little bit off-putting to a fresh palate. At least it was for me. Heck, I know a lot of people that absolutely love rye, so it may just vary palate to palate. But the rye that is one of my go-tos is Sazerac rye, and or Baby Saz, and then Knob Creek has a good rye that I really enjoy as well. Sagamore rye is another good one that I typically keep on hand, but that one is a lot stronger of that rye flavor. So I don't think that I was too fond of it when I first started. But if you are unsure of what your flavor profile is, I highly recommend buying a variety of whiskeys to try out, figuring out what you like, starting to lean a little bit more into what you like. And even if you drift away from what you don't like, keep in mind, if you've already bought a bottle of it, start with your first 5 and say you're 15 bottles in, go back to the 5 least liked bottles and see how much your palate is involved. You'll be surprised at some of the flavors you get. 1, once some of these whiskeys open up. 2, once you go back to something and you've had a chance to explore a variety of flavor profiles, it just hits different. So don't discount them out the gate. Never do a one and done unless it just absolutely tastes terrible. But you'd be surprised at how far your palate can evolve over time. If you like this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notification bells to stay up to date on all things Simple Whiskey. And I'll leave you with this. Don't start something you don't intend to finish. So pour your next glass and get started. Please remember to drink responsibly and keep it simple. Cheers.